Hey guys, Edre here, and I'm going to be doing a review of Depeche Mode once again. My last review was of A Broken Frame, their second album, so this one's of their third album. Construction Time Again. Construction Time Again is, oddly enough, according to Spotify, one of their least popular albums with the least amount of streams. That's just a side note, but I think I know why. This album is much more experimental than some of their previous albums. In my last review of A Broken Frame, I brought up multiple times how the band was going in a darker direction and how they were kind of expanding from that really early pop sound to a much more atmospheric and a much more cohesive sound on that album. On this album, however, they kind of continue down that path, but introduce a lot more industrial soundscapes. And this would be a common theme throughout the 80s for Depeche Mode. You know, first off, just look at the album art itself. As a guy, a worker, with a hammer. And throughout the album you have these sounds of them kind of just hitting things, sampling the noises from metal sounds, and it's very clangy, it's very early industrial sounding, and people underestimate, I think, how much of a role Depeche Mode had in early industrial music, because this album, purely to me, it's primarily an industrial album. The song Pipeline is extremely industrial, no matter how you look at it. And same with The Landscape is Changing, and even the hit on this album, Everything Counts, has a lot of industrial sounds throughout it. The little xylophone, the I don't know how to describe it, but it sounds kind of like a train horn. These sounds are present throughout Construction Time Again. And I feel like that may contribute to the reason why it's not as popular. You see, Depeche Mode took a lot of time experimenting on this album and experimenting with new sounds and styles, but there wasn't much of a pop aspect to this album, aside from a few songs here and there, such as Everything Counts and Love in Itself, the two songs that really have the most pop appeal on this album. And, well, even though this album may not be their most critically acclaimed or their most popular, I think it's a very important album in the band's history, as it really did mark a turning point where they started to embrace more industrial sounds and more, sampling. That was a big thing, is that they hadn't really done much sampling before, and they started to do that more here. You see, lyrically, this is actually a very political album. People often forget that Depeche Mode has been political before Spirit. When Spirit came out in 2017, a lot of people acted very surprised that they had gone in a very political direction. But I've kind of found that criticism funny, considering this album has a lot of statements on society, from a worker's standpoint. Everything Counts is about greed. The grabbing hands, grab all they can. That's not them literally talking about the hands. It's talking about the corporations and greed, taking money and, keeping it for themselves, while the workers get nothing. This is a theme that has been present throughout their music as far back as Construction Time Again, and the people that can't see that, because they're so blinded by their own political views, or they think anything political equals bad, it's ridiculous. Depeche Mode's been political for a long time. Just because they got a little more political on Spirit does not mean it's a new trend, and they're just keeping up with the times or whatever. It's just what they've always been doing. But back to the album, well, the politicalness is the very center of the lyrics on this album. There are some songs on here that are just kind of, to be honest, more abstract, like how I said on A Broken Frame, some of these lyrics, it takes a lot more to analyze. But there is one thing that's not that present on this album, which I kind of find interesting, and that is your pop-friendly, like, bubblegum songs. Go to Speak and Spell, at least half the songs on there are kind of just about having fun, or about, partying and stuff like that. A Broken Frame is a bit darker, but you still have songs like A Photograph of You and, The meaning of love, which are also very pop friendly. You don't get that much on Construction Time Again. This might be their least pop friendly album. Love in Itself is kind of a bit like that, and More Than a Party is a bit fun, but what's intriguing about the sound of this album is that it really does a good job in bringing the darkness from Broken Frame with new industrial ideas and kind of just giant melting pot of an album. And I personally think that it deserves a bit more credit. This review is a little bit shorter than some of my other Depeche Mode reviews, mainly because I do feel if any of their albums are a bit, this one's a bit more experimental. This one's a bit more, not as cohesive, but definitely an important album for them because they start to explore all the different sounds, which would become much more polished on their following albums. But needless to say, this album did produce some great songs. I love Everything Counts. I love Blind. I love Shame. I love the backing vocals on Shame a lot. More Than a Party is a banger. And Love in Itself, I probably already brought that up. I'm kind of dumb. But yeah, that's about it for now. It's a good album. It's a good stepping stone into the next era of Depeche Mode I will be covering soon. The next album I will be reviewing is Some Great Reward. But for now, check out Construction Time Again because not that many people are listening to it. So give it some support.